Mark's day had been a long, grinding march through deadlines, endless emails, and the kind of meetings that drained more energy than they produced results. He looked forward to one thing: the quiet sanctuary of his home in the peaceful Willow Creek community. But as he turned down his street, the familiar feeling of relief shifted instantly to confusion, then irritation. There it was. A sleek black SUV was parked directly in front of his garage, blocking the door completely. His first thought was disbelief. He rubbed his tired eyes and blinked again. The license plate gleamed in the fading sunlight. Linda. Not just any Linda. Linda Stevens, the iron-fisted HOA president, whose reputation for micromanaging every blade of grass and every mailbox was legendary. Mark's jaw tightened. Of all the neighbors, her parking in his garage without so much as a warning. It felt like an invasion. He stepped out of his car, the crunch of gravel underfoot sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Approaching the SUV, his eyes caught something taped to the windshield. A small folded note with neat, precise handwriting. His heart thumped faster as he unfolded it. Mark. Consider this a necessary reminder. Rules apply to everyone, including you. Let's keep our community orderly. Linda. A chill ran down his spine. It was passive-aggressive, but there was something else, something almost threatening beneath the polite words. Why would Linda park in his garage only to leave a note about rules? Was this some kind of power play? Before Mark could puzzle it out, the front door of Linda's house creaked open across the street. The HOA president herself stepped out, arms crossed, lips pursed in that familiar disapproving expression. She spotted Mark and smiled thinly, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Mark," she said, voice sharp and clipped like a whip crack. "I thought it was time someone reminded you that this neighborhood runs on rules. I needed a place to park for a few days, and your garage was convenient. You should consider yourself lucky it wasn't worse." Mark's stomach tightened. Convenient? That's his garage she was talking about. The place where he kept his tools, his weekend projects, and memories he rarely shared with anyone. "I don't think you have the right to just park in my garage without asking," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You could have called me, or asked the HOA to find a better solution." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Mark, the HOA has powers you don't understand. Sometimes we have to do what's best for the community, even if it ruffles a few feathers." Mark wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. It wasn't just about the SUV or the garage anymore. There was a deeper game at play, and he felt like a pawn caught in a net of rules and power. Around the block, neighbors peeked from behind curtains or stood on their porches, their eyes flicking between Mark and Linda. He sensed the invisible pressure building, people picking sides silently, whispering about the confrontation. The peaceful facade of Willow Creek was cracking. Mark swallowed hard. "I'll need it moved by tomorrow morning." Linda gave him a tight smile, one that promised neither compliance nor peace. "We'll see." As Linda retreated back into her house, Mark's eyes lingered on the black SUV blocking his garage. Something about this felt bigger than a parking dispute. The cryptic note, her brazen attitude, the hushed neighborhood gossip. Everything pointed to an undercurrent of conflict brewing just beneath the surface. And Mark knew this was only the beginning. He closed his front door behind him and stared at the locked garage, heart pounding with a mix of frustration and a strange curiosity. What was Linda really up to? And what was he about to get pulled into? The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds as Mark stepped outside, his mind racing. The black SUV was still firmly planted in front of his garage. An unyielding barrier to the quiet life he once knew. His phone buzzed. Texts from neighbors, some supportive, others warning him to tread carefully. It was clear that Linda's bold move had set something off in Willow Creek. Mark's next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, approached cautiously as he inspected the SUV. "That Linda," she muttered, shaking her head. "Always stirring the pot. You know she's got the whole HOA wrapped around her finger." Mark nodded, but kept his voice low. "I'm thinking of calling the HOA board. Maybe get some official word on this." Mrs. Patterson's eyes darted nervously. "Be careful. The HOA board. They're mostly her loyalists. You might be poking." A hornet's nest. Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was more than a simple parking dispute. It was a power play with invisible weapons. Later that day, Mark decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Hoping to gauge the mood, door after door, whispers followed him. "Did you see what Linda did? She's out of control." Mark's brave, but he's walking on thin ice. At the community park, Mark ran into Greg, a fellow homeowner known for his quiet pragmatism. Greg lowered his voice. "Look, Mark, the HOA's been acting strange lately. You're not the first one to have issues with Linda, but nobody's spoken out like you have. She's been pushing secret rules lately, making decisions behind closed doors. Folks are scared." Mark frowned. "Secret rules? What do you mean?" Greg glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in. "Rumors say there's a new HOA bylaw nobody's seen. Something about special access to private property under community interest. No one knows the details, but Linda's been using it to flex her power." A chill crept over Mark. Could this be the reason Linda parked in his garage? Some shadowy loophole giving her carte blanche. That evening, Mark received a call from the HOA board secretary, Ms. Ramirez. Her voice was polite but firm. "Mr. Anderson, the board has received your complaint about Mrs. Stevens's use of your garage. However, the board supports Mrs. Stevens's actions as being within the scope of her duties to the community." Mark's blood ran cold. Scope of her duties? How can that be? She's using my private property without permission. Ms. Ramirez sighed. The HOA must sometimes take unconventional steps to ensure compliance with community standards. Mrs. Stevens's actions fall within those parameters. Mark clenched his fists. It wasn't just about his garage anymore. It was about control. Determined to get answers, Mark showed up at the next HOA meeting, held in the small community center. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Linda was there, poised and commanding, her smile razor sharp. Mark stood and spoke clearly. "This garage is my property. No one, not even the HOA president, has the right to use it without permission. This is harassment and abuse of power." Linda's eyes flashed. "You misunderstand. The community's needs sometimes override individual preferences. You should have cooperated." Before Mark could respond, whispers broke out across the room. Some neighbors nodded. Others looked away. It was clear the community was divided. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the back. Mrs. Patterson. "If we let one person decide whose property they can take, where does it stop? This isn't the neighborhood we signed up for." The room erupted. Into debate, accusations flew, alliances formed, and fractured in real time. Mark felt the weight of the moment. This was no longer a simple dispute. It was a fracture, threatening to break the very fabric of their neighborhood. Walking home that night, Mark passed by his garage. The black SUV gleamed under the streetlights. A silent reminder of the battle ahead. He knew one thing for certain. This fight was just beginning. Mark's frustration simmered beneath the surface as the sun dipped below the horizon. For days, the black SUV remained an unyielding blockade to his garage. And to his peace of mind, each time he glanced out his window, Linda's car sat there, smugly parked, as if daring him to make a move. He replayed the HOA meeting in his head over and over, Linda's icy stare, the thinly veiled threats lurking beneath her polite words. The HOA board's tacit support only made it worse. Mark felt cornered, like a trapped animal with nowhere left to run. Late that night, with the neighborhood quiet and most lights off, Mark crept outside, carrying a toolbox. His hands were steady, but his heart pounded like a drum. He wasn't about to let this go any longer. He approached the garage door and studied the old lock. A simple mechanism, easily replaced, working swiftly but silently. Mark installed a new, heavy-duty lock on the garage door. No keys would be handed out, no exceptions. Before retreating indoors, Mark left a stark, handwritten note taped firmly to the garage door. Your rules don't apply here. The garage is locked until Linda Stevens removes her vehicle and apologizes publicly for abusing her position. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to the news. The SUV was trapped, locked inside Mark's garage, unable to move. Instantly, the gossip mill spun into overdrive. Doors flung open. Neighbors spilled onto sidewalks, exchanging theories and rumors. Some cheered Mark's boldness, whispering about standing up to the HOA's iron grip. Others warned him he'd gone too far, risking retaliation from Linda and the board. Linda herself was nowhere to be seen that morning. No phone calls, no attempts to move the vehicle. The silence was deafening. Rumors grew wilder. Some said Linda had disappeared out of shame or fury. Others suggested she was plotting her next move, biding time before retaliating with full force. Meanwhile, Mark's absence began almost as mysteriously as Linda's. That same night, after posting a terse message on the neighborhood online forum about the locked garage, Mark vanished. No one saw him leave, and no one knew where he went. His phone went unanswered. His emails remained unopened. His house sat eerily quiet. Neighbors began to speculate wildly. Had Mark fled to avoid an HOA backlash? Was he hiding from Linda's wrath? Or was something more sinister at play? At the next HOA meeting, now tinged with palpable tension, Linda finally broke her silence. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and sharp. This community will not tolerate lawlessness, she said, glancing pointedly at the empty chair where Mark should have been. I will be taking all necessary actions to restore order. A ripple of unease swept through the crowd. What actions? What lengths would Linda go to? The air was thick with suspense. That night, strange things began happening around Mark's home. Neighbors reported seeing shadowy figures lurking near the locked garage. Lights flickered inexplicably. Faint, banging noises echoed through the still air. Some wondered if Mark was trying to communicate, signaling a cry for help or a warning. Others whispered darker theories. Was Mark trapped in a dangerous game, far beyond a simple parking dispute? Days crawled by with no sign of Mark. The tension in Willow Creek became unbearable. Neighbors who once smiled politely now eyed each other with suspicion. Friendships fractured. Alliances hardened. The simple act of locking a garage door had cracked open a hidden abyss, revealing just how fragile the peace of this neighborhood truly was. And deep beneath the surface, a storm was gathering strength. The days stretched on like a taut wire ready to snap. Tenants of Willow Creek whispered behind closed doors and peeked nervously through curtains. But Mark remained nowhere to be seen. His house stood quiet. His lights darkened, his phone silenced. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth, leaving the locked garage and Linda's trapped SUV as silent monuments to the brewing conflict. Linda, on the other hand, had transformed overnight from the domineering HOA president to a woman visibly rattled. The impassive veneer she once wore cracked under the weight of her immobility. For the first time in years, she was powerless, unable to move the vehicle or command the community's respect with her usual iron fist. But she refused to give up. Every morning, she appeared outside Mark's home, pacing with a phone in hand, calling the HOA board, local authorities, even towing companies. Yet, the locked garage door was an impenetrable fortress. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate about strange noises emanating from Mark's property after dark. Several neighbors reported hearing faint banging and muffled thumps from the garage. Some claimed to see a shadowy figure pacing behind frosted windows, illuminated only by brief flashes of light. Was Mark trapped inside, or was he orchestrating some intricate plan from within? Curiosity and dread gripped the neighborhood like a vice. One night, Eleanor, a neighbor from across the street, swore she saw a faint light flicker through Mark's living room window. An anomaly, since he was known for leaving the lights off when away. Then, suddenly, the light vanished. She called out softly, but no answer came. The community's speculation spiraled. Was Mark in danger? Was he hiding from Linda's wrath? Or was this a deliberate disappearance? A strategic retreat to outmaneuver the HOA queen? Linda's frustration grew palpable, spilling into public forums and private messages. Her posts grew increasingly desperate. Veiled threats aimed not only at Mark, but at anyone who dared question her authority. Some neighbors, fearful of becoming her next target, kept their distance. Yet, a small faction of residents quietly rallied behind Mark's cause. They began organizing late-night meetings in basements and backyards, whispering about a resistance, a movement to reclaim their neighborhood from Linda's oppressive reign. Leaflets appeared on doorsteps, calling for transparency and reform within the HOA. But none of these whispers reached Mark. In the eerie silence of his locked house, Mark's only communication came through encrypted messages sent anonymously to select neighbors. The messages were brief, cryptic, hinting at secrets buried deep within the HOA's bylaws, and a plan to expose the truth behind Linda's unchecked power. At one point, a video clip surfaced, showing a grainy view from inside the garage. It depicted Linda, after hours, sneaking around with a flashlight, trying to force open the locked door. Her expression was a mix of fury and fear. Was this the breaking point? Tension reached a fever pitch as the 10th day approached. On the morning of the 10th day, the community gathered outside Mark's house, a crowd buzzing with anticipation and fear. Questions hung thick in the air. Would Mark return? Would the garage door finally open? Would Linda's grip on the neighborhood finally falter? As the clock ticked toward midday, a single knock echoed through the quiet street. All eyes turned to the front door, and then, from the shadows, Mark emerged, calm, collected, and holding something in his hands. The silence was absolute. What he revealed next would change everything. Mark's reappearance sent a shockwave rippling through Willow Creek. The crowd, once tense and uncertain, now surged with a mix of relief, curiosity, and simmering anger. Mark stood tall on his porch, the object in his hands concealed beneath a folded cloth. "Thank you for waiting," Mark began, his voice steady, commanding attention. "I've been gone not out of fear, but by choice, to prepare." The crowd murmured, hanging on his every word. Slowly Mark unfolded the cloth, revealing a small handheld device, a memory card. "This contains footage," he said, eyes locking onto Linda Stevens, who stood rigid, lips pressed into a tight line. "Footage from a camera I installed inside the garage. It shows things no one was supposed to see." The crowd gasped. Linda's composure flickered for the first time. Mark pressed play on his phone, connecting it to a makeshift projector. The grainy video illuminated the white wall of his porch, revealing a night scene. Linda, long after sunset, slipping into the garage with a flashlight. She was rummaging through boxes, rifling through papers, clearly searching for something. Then, something more shocking. Linda removing a personal package from Mark's garage, violating his property under the guise of community interest. The footage cut to another scene. Linda on her phone, speaking with unknown voices, making threats veiled in coded language about handling dissenters in the neighborhood. The implications were clear. Linda was abusing her position, manipulating the HOA to serve her own agenda. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Linda finally spoke, voice low and dangerous. "This footage is doctored. A smear campaign orchestrated by Mark to undermine the HOA's authority, but Mark's allies, those who had been quietly organizing reform behind the scenes, stepped forward. They confirmed the footage's authenticity and began sharing other examples of Linda's questionable actions. Unapproved rule changes, secret fines, intimidation tactics. The community's trust shattered like glass. The HOA board was forced to convene an emergency session. Linda, once untouchable, found herself cornered, her grip on power slipping. The atmosphere was electric, every word charged with accusation and defense. Yet, amidst the chaos, a new threat emerged. Anonymous messages flooded the neighborhood forums, cryptic warnings that the battle was far from over. Some accused Mark of playing a dangerous game. Others warned Linda's allies would strike back. Mark's phone buzzed late into the night. A text from an unknown number appeared. "You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back." As tension spiraled, neighbors grew uneasy. Some who had supported Mark began to doubt, fearful of becoming collateral damage in this unseen war. Others doubled down, rallying for change. Linda, no longer the unchallenged queen of the HOA, vowed retaliation, but the line between justice and vendetta blurred. Mark knew that exposing Linda was only the start. The fight for the soul of Willow Creek had become a battle for survival, where every move could tip the scales toward peace or chaos. As he stared at his phone, the ominous message burned bright. The war had only just begun. The night after Mark's explosive reveal, Willow Creek was anything but peaceful. Whispered conversations turned into hushed warnings, and neighbors who had once greeted each other warmly now glanced over their shoulders with suspicion. Mark's phone continued to buzz relentlessly. Anonymous texts, strange calls with silence on the other end, and once, a faint chilling whisper. Before the line went dead, someone was watching, someone was waiting. He barely slept, pacing his living room, eyes flicking toward the darkened garage door. The locked SUV was still trapped inside, a monument to defiance, but also a reminder of the growing danger surrounding him. The next morning, Mark awoke to find his front yard vandalized. The word traitor was scrawled across his driveway in thick, black paint. His mailbox was smashed. The message was clear. The fight wasn't over, and his enemies were escalating. Linda, meanwhile, had gone silent in public, but behind closed doors, she was orchestrating a different kind of battle. The HOA board held secret meetings, planning ways to discredit Mark, to fracture the coalition of neighbors rising against her. Late one afternoon, Mark received an unexpected visitor. Officer Daniels from the local police department. His expression was serious. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around your property," Daniels said, glancing nervously toward the garage. "Trespassing, possible vandalism. We're increasing patrols, but you should be cautious." Mark nodded, masking the rising tension inside. "Thank you, officer. I'm doing everything I can to stay ahead." Days passed in a strange haze of fear and determination. The community was split, rumors swirling like wildfire. Some whispered about a secret faction within the HOA wielding power behind the scenes, possibly Linda's allies, who would stop at nothing to maintain control. One evening, Mark discovered a small envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single typed sentence. "You don't know what you've unleashed. Back down or disappear like the last troublemaker." The last troublemaker. Who was that? The message sent a shiver down Mark's spine. Was someone else before him? Crushed into silence, determined to find answers, Mark reached out to a few trusted neighbors who had kept quiet until now. They revealed chilling stories. Neighbors who had mysteriously moved away, unexplained fines that ruined reputations, and whispered threats that kept others in line. The quiet war beneath Willow Creek's manicured lawns was more ruthless and dangerous than Mark had imagined. Yet, despite the warnings and threats, Mark refused to back down. That night, as he sat in his dimly lit living room, a sudden crash echoed from the garage. Heart hammering, he grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the source. The garage door, once locked tight, now showed fresh scratches and dents. Someone had tried to break in. Mark's breath caught. Whoever it was had come close. Too close. Outside, the street remained empty and silent. The shadowy war had reached his doorstep, and Mark knew he was no longer just fighting for a parking spot. He was fighting for his home, his safety, and the soul of Willow Creek itself. The break-in attempt marked a terrifying new chapter for Mark. He couldn't shake the feeling that an invisible enemy was closing in, a ghost lurking just out of sight, pulling strings from the shadows. Willow Creek's polished lawns and friendly facades had transformed overnight into a battleground of whispered threats and unseen eyes. Mark installed security cameras, motion sensors, and extra locks. Every creak or rustle outside his home jolted him awake. Yet despite the precautions, the menace remained elusive. One evening, as Mark reviewed footage from his newly installed cameras, his blood ran cold. A figure cloaked in black, wearing gloves and a hood, prowled just beyond the driveway, holding a small device Mark didn't recognize. The figure moved deliberately toward the locked garage, tapping the device against the lock and muttering under their breath. Suddenly, the device emitted a low electronic hum. The garage lock clicked open. Mark's hands trembled as he watched the intruder slip inside. He grabbed his phone to call the police, but before he could dial, the figure stepped into the camera's light. And Mark's heart skipped a beat. It was Greg, the quiet neighbor who had warned him about the HOA's secret rules. Confused and betrayed, Mark confronted Greg the next morning. Greg's eyes were haunted. "I'm sorry, Mark," he said quietly. "I didn't want it to come to this." Greg explained the pressure he'd faced. Threats against his family. Subtle coercion from Linda's allies. "They have leverage, Mark. You can't fight them alone. But there's a way out." Greg revealed a hidden room beneath the community center, where confidential HOA documents were kept. Among them, he'd uncovered evidence of illegal dealings, falsified bylaws, and even financial fraud tied to Linda's reign. "This is the smoking gun," Greg whispered. "If we expose this, Linda's grip will shatter." But getting the eye documents meant a dangerous mission into the heart of enemy territory. That night, Mark and Greg met under the cover of darkness, planning their infiltration. The community center was equipped with alarms, cameras, and a security guard known to be fiercely loyal to Linda. As they prepared, Mark's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "Turn back now, or you'll regret it." Ignoring the threat, the two men slipped into the night. Inside the community center, every step echoed ominously. The air was thick with tension. The security cameras swept slowly, the guard patrolling unpredictably. They moved like shadows, avoiding detection by seconds. Finally, they found the hidden room, a dusty, forgotten archive locked behind a false wall. Greg worked quickly, picking the lock with practiced hands. Inside, rows of files and binders awaited them. Mark scanned the documents, his eyes widening as he found not only illegal bylaws, but also detailed records of intimidation tactics, bribes, and forged signatures. "This is it," Mark breathed. "The proof we need." Suddenly, footsteps thundered down the hallway. The guard was returning. With barely a moment to spare, Mark and Greg grabbed the files and slipped into a side exit. Their hearts pounded as they fled into the night, chased by the echo of footsteps. Outside, under the moonlight, Mark knew the real battle was just beginning. The evidence could topple Linda, and possibly the entire corrupt HOA board. But releasing, it would unleash chaos in Willow Creek. Neighbors would be forced to pick sides, alliances would fracture, and the delicate peace they once knew would shatter. Yet Mark's resolve hardened. He would see this through, no matter the cost. Because some fights weren't just about garages or parking spots. They were about justice. The morning sun cast long shadows over Willow Creek. But for Mark, it was the dawn of reckoning. Armed with the damning evidence, he knew today would change everything, for better or worse. He convened a secret meeting with the faction of neighbors, who had quietly rallied behind him. The mood was tense, but resolute. Faces once clouded by fear now shone with determination. "Today, we expose the truth," Mark declared. "No more lies, no more intimidation." They planned to distribute the documents to every household and demand an emergency HOA meeting. One where Linda's reign could be challenged with undeniable proof. But as the group dispersed, Mark felt a chill. Someone was watching. A whisper traveled through the neighborhood. Linda had called in reinforcements, not just loyalists, but hired private investigators and legal sharks ready to crush dissent. Hours later, the emergency meeting filled the community hall to capacity. The air buzzed with anticipation, uncertainty, and undercurrents of fear. Linda took the stage, her smile sharp but eyes wary. She opened with a rehearsed speech about community unity and trust. But the crowd barely heard her. When Mark stepped forward, holding the stack of documents high, silence fell like a heavy curtain. He laid out the evidence: forged documents, illegal fines, threats recorded in secret videos, financial misdeeds that funded Linda's personal agenda. Gasps echoed. Murmurs turned into shouts. The crowd split instantly, some rallying to Mark's side, others fiercely defending Linda. Suddenly, Linda's voice cut through the chaos, cold and resolute. "You think this will bring me down?" she hissed. "I have one more card to play." She lifted her phone, playing a recording that stunned everyone. A voicemail from Mark's own number. A threatening message from an unknown voice, warning Linda to back off or face consequences. The room froze. Had Mark been playing both sides? Was this a setup? Mark's heart pounded. The room was spinning. Had someone framed him? But before he could respond, the doors burst open. uniformed officers entered, holding a warrant for an immediate HOA audit and investigation. A move sparked by an anonymous tip. The crowd gasped again. Mark exchanged a glance with Greg, who nodded grimly. The truth was bigger than either of them realized. Someone else had been pulling strings, manipulating both sides for their own gain. As officers began questioning Linda, and her allies grew visibly shaken, Mark's phone buzzed once more. A final message, this time from a private number. Well, played. The neighborhood is yours. But remember, trust is the most fragile thing of all. Mark looked around at the fractured faces of Willow Creek's residents. Some relieved, others bitter, many uncertain. The battle was over, but the war for community, for trust, had only just begun. As he walked away from the hall, Mark glanced back at the locked garage, now empty, the black SUV gone. Linda's car was never seen again. But the scars of the conflict would linger, reminders that beneath the perfect lawns and quiet streets, human nature, with all its flaws and fights, was always ready to surface, and in Willow Creek, nothing would ever be quite the same again.